Hello, and welcome to the Payments Interviews, the podcast where industry leaders share their wisdom and insight. I'm Paul Skelton. I'm a payments headhunter who helps payments companies find exceptional sales executives. Enjoy the show. Today, I'm here with Anton. Welcome, Anton.
Thank you, Paul. My pleasure to be here.
Perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself.
Of course. I'm Anton Kornilov. I'm a global payments executive. I've been in payments for more than 2 decades, most recently with MasterCard, prior to that with American Express. I've covered all sorts of payments, consumer, business to business, domestic, cross-border, card-based, non-card-based, professional strength, go-to-market, marketing, business transformation, and strategy and execution. In addition to that, as you probably have seen, I am a volleyball advocate. I have been playing volleyball for the past 45 years and still do.
Wow.
And my journey in volleyball kind of went from a junior player to competing for my university, then joining a club in the UK. And then in the last 9 years, I decided to give back to the sport that shaped me so much. And so I became a volunteer at my club, Richmond Volleyball Club. I've been doing management of one of the biggest divisions in the club. I've been doing coaching, particularly enjoy coaching juniors. And now I actually stepped back from managing the club. And I am in July, there will be a vote at the Volleyball England, which is the national governing body of volleyball in England, AGM, to elect one director for the board. And I'm one of the two. So I really look forward to that vote. And I really want to contribute more to the sport that actually did so much to me.
Well, fantastic. And good luck with that.
Thank you.
July. So what age were you when you started playing volleyball?
Well, yeah, about 9, 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And what got you into it? Was it for family member?
It was, it was at our hometown. That was one of the good sports. There was a good club there. 2 Olympians and 1 Olympic champion came out of the club. And as you can see, I was always a bit tall as a kid, so my mom didn't know what to do with me, and that was the sport that she found for me. And I'm very grateful because I carried that throughout my life. That was probably the only constant I've had in my life is volleyball.
Excellent. No, that's really interesting. I always like playing myself. I'm not quite as tall as you, unfortunately. You're 6'5". I'm more like 5'6". Well, I am taller than that, but still, it was always good. But yeah, not as much opportunity to smash it when you're 5'9", unfortunately.
Yeah, well, you know what? I didn't smash too many balls either because when I was playing at a junior level, I was quite short compared to others.
Oh, really?
And so I ended up being actually a setter all my life. So I did get to smash with the ball a few times, but more often than not, I was the person who is coordinating the team and making sure that the right player actually finishes the attack. And
okay, so that's interesting. So a good friend of mine is 6'4" and he's a rower, and he's the tiny one in the rowing
exactly.
team.
I mean,
is it the same, similar thing?
Pretty
for you?
much the same. Yes.
Okay. Wow. So I imagine you get some people that are very tall playing volleyball.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, interesting. Great game though. So fine. So you obviously were doing that, from what you said, to a pretty high standard initially in Russia, and then that carried on over here. That was it something you considered ever as a career, rather than a hobby that you took to a very high standard?
That's a good question, actually. As a matter of fact, I did, but it was a little bit of a convoluted decision. So. Again, since my childhood, I was set to become an engineer. My dad was an engineer. He's been my role model for all my life, and it was so easy to make that decision to follow his footsteps. When I was actually making a decision about where to go to university, one of the options I had was actually to go and become a professional volleyball player.
Fantastic.
And so, yes, I'm actually very grateful to my father for spending hours with me actually to think through and make the right decision. Because I think a choice to become a professional sportsman, which I'm not, right? So I've probably played an amateur sport at a high level, but I'm not a professional athlete. It's a big decision, and it makes a lot of, it changes your life, I believe. And in the end, I decided to choose engineering.
Okay. And that's not ever something you've looked back on and thought, oh, what if I'd actually done it? I could have gone to the Olympics
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think I wouldn't have gone to the Olympics. Unfortunately, I think to operate and to play at that level, someone needs to be extremely talented and
Okay.
extremely dedicated. And I've seen people around me who were a lot more talented than me and a lot more dedicated to sport than me. And I think it's fair that they made it there, not me.
Okay. That sounds like a very mature response to that question. Somebody I spoke to recently is still waiting for their England call up. And it's only a dream that I gave up, well, 20 years ago, maybe now. But okay, interesting. So if engineering then, so what type of engineer was your father? How seriously did you consider going into that?
Well, he was actually a physicist, pretty well internationally recognized when he was active there. I went probably down a slightly different path. I chose mechanical engineering,
Okay.
and in the end, I got into a very nice, a very prestigious technical university in Moscow, and had a good time both studying there and playing volleyball there, because it so happened that they had a professional volleyball club.
Okay.
With which I could train, but I did not play for them. So that was a very pleasant coincidence.
Was that was a coincidence rather than part of the decision?
A semi-coincidence, right?
Okay.
So, and then it was interesting that in the end, engineering was the wrong choice of a career. Again, thankful for the opportunities I had to consider and reconsider my career. And once I've graduated, I decided to do something different.
Okay, and it sounds like from what you've said, that was a decision that was not necessarily a joint decision, but that your father had a heavy input into that. What was the advice and the insight that he gave you? Do you remember?
Well, I think it was mostly support, because at that stage I was, he left it to me to make those decisions, but definitely unparalleled support in terms of trying to consider the options, helping me with writing letters to universities, thinking about that, getting enrolled, and in the end, I actually got enrolled in the international MBA program.
Okay,
which really opened my mind to different cultures, how people from different cultures work together and separately. I think that was my career defining moment. So once I tried a bit of that, it was very difficult to go back and do something that is not multinational, that is not across borders, that does not deal with lots of cultures and people.
Okay, excellent. And did you feel a pull towards a certain culture as a result of that? Was there, because some people, for example, think, right, I'd want to go to America, or I want to go to a different part of Europe. What was your experience?
So that was, I actually had the program that I got into had two campuses. One was in Europe, and then graduated in the US. The campus in Europe was quite small, about 70 to 80 students, but they came from 30 countries. So
wow.
the multinational nature of this program was amazing. Yes, there were a couple of cultures that probably overrepresented, US and Italy, but there were 28 other nationalities. And I think what was interesting, and I think this is where kind of thinking back to this, to my experience, it was not, every time we worked as a team, it took us a long time, we were broken into smaller groups and we had to do some projects. It took us quite some time to get used to each other and understand how to communicate, even though we kind of had a common goal and we were there to study and had common goals set for us as a part of the challenge. It took sometimes a day or two for us to just understand each other and how we're approaching things.
Okay.
But what's amazing is, in the end, the result always exceeded what I thought we could achieve. And I think that was due to the fact that we came from so many different cultures. And actually, one of my ex-teammates just recently posted his thoughts on 8 ways diversity and inclusion can help teams perform better. And, at least, stronger financial returns, smarter decisions, because people consider different options because of their lived experiences, more effective problem solving, because people from different cultures actually question different things, and because they have different backgrounds, different lived experience, and enhanced innovation. So, right now, when I kind of looked at that post, I said, yeah, that makes perfect sense now. But at that time, I was not thinking about it. There are many things that I didn't think about that in the end, when you look back, that's what it was. But this was really an interesting way of looking back and thinking, this makes sense. This diversity and multicultural experience really makes difference.
Kind of codifies what you learned.
Exactly. No, absolutely. And that was complete by coincidence that was posted just recently.
Right, okay. Yeah, I think there's a book, isn't there, about innovation? I can't remember which one it is, but it's saying about you should drill a hole, an inch deep and then go and drill lots of other holes rather than drilling one hole a mile deep and getting so obsessed with that idea.
Exactly.
And that's something I think that humans are quite resistant to, really. Because generally, if you have any kind of like bad brainstorming activities can be, right, let's think of an idea to solve this. And then there becomes some kind of groupthink idea that everybody latches onto.
Exactly.
And they'll explore it to its fullest rather than go, okay, let's park that idea. Now let's think of something completely different. Everyone's very resistant to move away from the safe ground of their original idea.
When people come from different backgrounds and cultures, kind of their inch deep hole is in a different place.
Yeah.
And so that's why there's a lot less groupthink and reinforcement. But also I think in any situation, any team activity, there needs to be a leader, there needs to be a coach. And that's the kind of the job and the challenge for the leader and the coach to actually then direct the team thinking and maybe break that deadlock and open up new avenues. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's when it's done well, isn't it? There's lots of examples I've personally been through where the person who's doing that sees their job as just to walk around the outside of the group and then go, oh, okay, and then move on rather than actually participating and guiding it with those kind of suggestions that you've just mentioned. I think, I agree with that. So at this stage of your career, what was it that pulled you towards the commercial side of things more and away from the engineering? What was it about engineering that you thought, I'm not sure this is actually me?
I kind of had a very interesting journey of self-discovery throughout my life. And only now when I have an opportunity to think and consider different things, I kind of say, that's why I can, the things that I did, I thought were kind of impulsive, or I couldn't explain why I was doing it. There was actually a reason. I just couldn't see the reason, but maybe events or what people told me kind of influenced my decision. So as an example, I believe in many cases, especially, the engineering that I was involved in, it was more or less an individual contributor kind of environment. If you look at my Belbin profile, I'll be a proper completer finisher, sitting there trying to finish the problem, put all the dots where they should be, and be happy about it. And I mentioned that in volleyball, I was actually a setter. That is more of a, again, if you look at the Belbin profile, is a coordinator. So it's actually not shining yourself. It's not making the spike. It's making others.
Yeah, enabling others, yeah.
And I think that there was always, and I'm actually looking back now, I'm just realizing some of those tensions in me. Because it was always, for me, strange to be complete to finish. Although I feel every time I took a questionnaire or some sort of a profile test, I always ended up there. But I'm not sure I was always comfortable there. Whereas I was very comfortable with my role as a setter in volleyball, and I think that's where once I've experienced this multinational surroundings, the conversations that we had about different types of business, be it human resources, be it organizational management, be it logistics, all that felt more of a team effort. All that felt more of a kind of coordinated effort rather than individual push. And that's why I kind of feel that I was gravitating towards that, but only now I think when I think about it, I'm kind of, okay, maybe that's why. Yeah, so I don't think it was a big decision, but it kind of, moved that way in my life.
Okay, and the team thing is clearly a running foundation of everything that you've done, really. I
think so. And I really enjoyed being a part of the team, both as a contributor, as a participant, but also as a team leader.
Okay. And in terms of, to the comparisons between sports and work, the role of a coach is pretty clear within sport as to what you've got to do. How does that translate or not translate necessarily into business?
It's an excellent question, Paul, because you're right. In sport, coaches, the role is defined. You're not supposed to be on the pitch, with very, very few exceptions where you have a player coach, which is very rare. And that kind of almost forced separation of duties creates, I think, a very healthy environment where the coach can actually, set the strategy, focus on improving individual players, stand back and observe from the distance, right? Set common goals. Whereas in sport, there is also a role of a team captain or a team leader, right? So it is not necessarily a coach. It could be the best player on court. In business, it's a bit, I think those roles are really, in many cases, are mixed up, right? So, and if you look at the modern business practices, a lot of team leaders are required to perform individually and be strong individual contributors, which I think makes them less effective. The more team leaders concentrate on developing the team, on making others shine, instead of actually shining themselves, the stronger the team would be and the better results will be. And again, going back, especially if that team is multicultural, when you have a dominant team leader, that negates the cultural differences, that negates the different lived experiences. And it's, although, there are always exceptions, right? So there are fantastic leaders who can perform individually. But I think in the current business settings, you're responsible for P&L management, you're responsible for actually, you as a team leader, you're also part of a management team, for example. So you act as a team member there. So those roles are a lot more mixed up. And I think there could be, business leaders need to think of themselves as more of a sports coaches rather than team captains.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation, I think, in both business and sport. But if you think of all the best sporting teams, when they're performing well and the coach is very much sat down, like in football or rugby, rugby in particular, people say everybody knows their roles. It's a well-drilled team. The coaches go everyone exactly where they want them. And when they're performing, everybody applauds the fact that they're not up and ranting and raving. But it's as soon as standards drop that people say, look at him, there's no engagement, there's no passion. They're just sitting there. They're not involved in it at all. And there's a similar thing in business, I think, that, an interview question that's starting to become more widely used is, if you were to leave your role now, what would fall over in the first week? And, the whole idea being the person says, well, I'm very involved in this. And you go, oh, okay, well, you can't move because your team isn't set up to succeed.
Yeah.
So people accept that good performance looks like a team running itself because everyone knows their roles. But as soon as, and this has been my experience for working in sales roles, as soon as something goes wrong, people always say, why aren't you all over every detail? Yeah. Why aren't you out there doing that with the person in your team?
Absolutely. And I think just to build on that, and it's interesting how in corporate culture, very often team leaders are still, their year-end performance is assessed by what they do personally rather than what their team does. And I think, again, if you want to instill more of a team coach culture in business, you need to almost remunerate team leaders based on the team performance rather than their own. So I think it's against how we look at incentivizing some of our leaders.
Yeah, and
it's important.
And in both disciplines, how important do you think it is to play without fear?
Wow, I think there is. If I look at the sport, especially amateur sport, right? Because I think professional sport is slightly more demanding because you start playing without fear when you are not afraid to fail. And you are not afraid to fail if you're in a safe environment, right? If you trust people around you, and you failed before. I mean, having not won is a big skill, right? So not, having lost is something that people need to experience, and it's, you lose once, you lose twice. Yes, you don't become a loser, but you need to know how to cope with it, how to get over it. And I think in the current, in the modern business environment, there are fewer and fewer opportunities to fail. And I think successful companies in payments, successful companies in tech, they actually, fail fast, get over it, try again, move on. It's almost like a sports mentality, right? And I think, again, in professional sports, if you're losing too often, you're probably not progressing in your professional career. But I think the amateur sport really gives you this opportunity to experience both the highs of the wins and the lows of the losses, and how to manage and how to cope with that, and how to learn lessons, how not to become emotional about it. Of course you get emotional, but then stepping back, so what went wrong? How we're going to work on that? And I wish that could be more widespreadly used in the professional settings, because I think that's the skill that is very hard to learn from someone telling you. You need to experience it.
Yeah, I think everybody wants people that have failed, but they want people that have failed elsewhere.
Well, exactly.
So they don't have to pay for the failure.
That's a good point. That's a good point. But I think, it's a very, very useful skill.
Okay. I wonder what do you think that we should be doing to encourage that, to break that resistance, to give people the freedom to fail? What's the kind of cultural problem or the hurdle that we need to overcome for that to happen?
I'm not sure if it's just one hurdle, right? So I think this is, again, if you draw parallels between business and sport, the trademarks of the successful team are kind of pretty similar, right? So, and I think a successful team does allow for its members, or for the team itself, to experience failures or losses at some stage, and the things around having a clear purpose, right? So if we're achieving the end goal and we've failed somewhere on one or two games, that is fine, right? So if we're still winning the game and we've lost a couple of sets, that is still fine. So it's that's one. I think the communication as well, right? So the how to communicate with the team, how to encourage people when they're probably not performing at their best, right? So how to build trust between the team members, how to make sure that people have their roles and know their roles. I think that's also hugely important. If we, and also asking for help. I think the best call in volleyball I know is help. Because when the ball is, when you cannot reach it, you turn around and you ask your teammates to help, and they run and they pick up the ball, and then the ball is recycled and you play another point. I think that's all those. I don't think it's just one thing that we can tweak. I think if we apply the best practices, the good practices, things that work both in sport and in business, that allows people to actually experience what you've just mentioned and be comfortable with failures, but learning from them and moving on.
Okay, and you've worked with, led teams across different time zones. Is there any particular culture or country that you think does this better than others? Is there are there differences that enable people in Europe to deal with this thing better than Americans, for example? What things have you seen that you think we should do more of that?
I'm not sure, because I think I wouldn't pick a country. So just to give you, you mentioned just to give you an example. Before this interview, I was reflecting on the teams that I've led, and one of them was based in 6 countries and about 7 different nationalities. Another one based in 3 countries, 10 different nationalities. All of them brought, and also if you try to apply the stereotypes to those cultures, I was constantly surprised, because you would expect a person from Spain doing something that more kind of culture aligned with our culture,
right? And
then you get a completely different Spaniard talking to you, and it's amazing. But their lived experiences, their background, their again those multiple 1-inch holes.
Yes.
So I wouldn't to answer your question, I wouldn't pick one country. I don't have a country, but the more diverse the environment is, you need to know how to manage it, right? So you need to know how to communicate, because not a lot of cultures will ask for help the same way, right? So some people will probably retreat somewhere and would not speak, right? So allowing actually people to share the cultural differences. I think that's another one. It's not only the team leader who needs to understand them, right? So lived experiences need to be shared by different team members, and giving them space to do it, how to collaborate. I think it's very important. The thing that comes to mind is actually we all went through a terrible experiment about 5 years ago around COVID, right? So when we all got locked up.
Yep.
And half of our communication channels and methods got changed. We've learned how to communicate in different ways, fantastic, but a lot of other communication channels got locked up. But what was also interesting is actually how, because we dealt with people who were at home, they almost allowed us to enter their safe space.
Mm.
And that was, for me, eye-opening. Talking to people who were experiencing lockdown in India and how they were going through that in their circumstances was completely different to what people were doing in the US, completely different to what I was doing in London. And that was, I think it's, again, that speaks to learning about each other and your cultural background and where you came from and how you learn, how you respond to things. It was a very cruel experiment, but I think when those team members allowed us into their homes, was a great asset.
Yeah, I suppose you realize things that you thought were a normal family setup aren't necessarily the case for people in a different part of the world.
Exactly. And that's why, to answer your question, I'm not sure if I would pick one, but I would definitely pick diversity.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a common theme so far, I'm finding. Okay. And how has sport influenced your leadership style, and any specific team or experience that shaped your thinking?
I think we've talked about it a little bit, but my natural tendency is to be a completer finisher, right? So and I think I've mentioned. So I led a team in Europe that was dealing with the regulatory changes for MasterCard from a business point of view. Actually, not to forget, I listed the nationalities of the team. So Swedish, Argentine, and Italian, India, Spain, USA, South Africa, Poland, and me. So
it's quite the mix.
And we probably were about 11, 10 people, right? So, and it's about 10 nationalities.
Yeah.
So thankfully, we had the opportunity to go through a bit of a forming phase, right? When we actually went all facilitated team building.
Yeah.
In that environment, I just realized that most of us were completer finishers. I did not build the team, but I would have probably hired the same people.
Okay.
And this is, again, how the team influenced me, is to step back and say, no, I cannot be it. The team cannot, so we needed to take different roles, and almost this role clarity. Sometimes it was explicit, sometimes it was a little bit more implicit. Definitely it influenced the role I played. So I really made an effort not to, to be a coordinator, to be a team player, to help the team kind of gel and move forward. And again, the result, remember, of those 8 things I've mentioned for, why the diverse teams are so successful. And one of them is innovation. So out of that team came the entrance of MasterCard into open banking, for example, right? So account-to-account payments, how MasterCard was thinking about strong customer authentication, not the products, but actually how to, what role we would want to play in Europe. So a very diverse team. That pretty small team made I think a big impact on the direction of innovation with the MasterCard.
Okay, so I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, is it forming, norming, performing, and storming, isn't it?
Exactly.
So how did you, as well as having that unique blend and everyone having their own roles and knowing what they're aiming for, was there anything specific that you brought in that took you from forming to storming? Any sort of, if you were giving advice to someone that's dealing with a diverse, culturally very different team, there'd be a lot of differences from Russia to South Africa to Sweden. Can you think of any sort of tactical things that you brought in to get the best out of that team?
I think it was communication within the team, and different ways people were comfortable communicating. Some of them were more comfortable communicating in a written form. Some of them it was more kind of phone discussions, phone conversations. For some, it was better to have a face-to-face, hour-long brainstorm with me or with a colleague. Some were more comfortable in the group thinking sessions. And so understanding those differences, that's number one. Making an effort to actually allow people to communicate and be communicated to in their preferred way. Just taking time, because I don't think it's that straightforward to you need to really make an effort to communicate in the way that people are comfortable to receive the message. And the other thing is actually I've tried for us to be together as much as possible. And I know that in the current business environment is not necessarily easy in terms of budgets, in terms of travel restrictions. Thankfully, that was all in Europe. So to go from London to Brussels, that wasn't that difficult at that time. But again, in many cases, by sitting together and talking together in the same room, that was when we were the most effective, the most creative.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds, because it's one thing you're mentioning, it sounds like it's simple, but it's the thing that's most often got wrong, isn't it? Is communication.
And it's so multifaceted, right? So it's the way you communicate, it's the way people receive the message, it's different forms of communication, it's different frequency of communication, right? So if I tell you now that I'm an expert at that, I would be lying, right? I'm still learning, but I've seen how powerful it could be, how the communication within the team can make a big difference, especially if the team is so multicultural.
Yeah, and it's so it has to be tailored, doesn't it, for it to work? I mean, what you're advocating, which I think is right, is regular communication, one-to-one as often as possible as suits that individual, and really clear goals. I spoke to someone earlier this week, senior salesperson, who's wanting to leave the place where they're at because the person they work for insists on a daily one-to-one where they do a full pipeline review. And this person who's senior has been working in the role for a long while and finds that micromanaging. And so there's a fine line, isn't there, between communication that's strong and regular and brings everyone together and communication that drives people apart.
Look, and I think this is actually a very interesting observation, because actually managing geographically dispersed teams forces you, or at least forced me, right? So forces a leader to step back from micromanaging to being a coach, to macromanaging, right? So setting the goals, because you cannot, especially if you're in a different time zone, you cannot be as involved in tracking daily progress as if you are remote. And I think that probably through experience kind of allowed me to let go.
Yeah.
Okay, so as long as we agree on the goal, as long as we understand that we're moving there, I did not need progress every day. I think it's a bit of trust. Well, I mean, it's a big part of it is trust, right? So making sure that you trust those individuals. But at the same time, it's just realization that that is not, checking your pipeline every day is not what's going to get it either bigger or converted.
Yeah, exactly. And also the update is, well, there's only been 2 hours since we last spoke.
Well, exactly. And you just spent an hour doing the update instead of chasing the pipeline.
Yeah, interesting. So there's definitely an element of the old maxim of hire good people and get out of their way.
Well, for sure.
Okay. I mean, we've covered some of this already, but the theme of this conversation is why payments are a team sport.
Yeah.
So give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So when Paul, you and I, thought about this this conversation, I don't think we arrived to that straight away. But over time, and as we were talking about, absolutely. And so for me, electronic payments actually have always been a bit of a team sport, right? So, but for me, early payments, it was more like of a relay, even, traveler's checks kind of, as you get into more complex payments right now, and it's cross-border payments, it's various forms of domestic payments, business payments, and so on and so forth. The complexity is growing, right? The number of players, is growing. Technology is advancing so fast every day that one player cannot be on the edge of everything, right? So now it's then more about collaboration, right? So more about interoperability. And actually, I was hosting a webinar not about sports, right, but about payments. A few weeks ago, we had a representative of TerraPay, Crown Agents Bank, and Nationwide. Very different players and very different spaces, but they agreed that interoperability and collaboration over competition, that's what's going to drive the next wave of innovation and the next horizon of payments. So the markets are becoming more complex, more fragmented. I think it's harder to build a moat and succeed by out-competing everyone else, right? So you need to collaborate. I actually was thinking, of a few kind of parallels between volleyball and payments as well. So in volleyball, there is this very effective but very difficult thing to do when a middle player runs very quickly and the setter almost gives him a ball into the hand, and they spike the ball, and it's all done. It looks beautiful
when it's
very
done well,
fast.
yeah.
It's like faster payments in the UK or PIX in Brazil. But if one of these little things, the pass or the timing or fails, it looks terrible,
Yep.
and you don't score a point. And it's again, all the pieces need to function in real time and collaborate with each other. So it's the banks, it's the schemes, it's the infrastructure operator, almost the regulator helping the entire industry. So that's kind of domestic settings.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about cross-border payments, things get even more complex, right? So it's again, and if you think about volleyball, it's almost like a multi-stage rally. You pass the ball, then the ball is set, it goes to the other side, it comes back to you. So it's similar to cross-border payments where you pass the payment, you pass the information from one player to another. Now there are more and more players thinking about fraud, compliance, KYC, and helping banks and other operators to conduct that payment, right? So, but I think and I've been in cards for a long time and card payments, and the bit that I always thought about it as a card payment as a kind of as I said, as a relay, right? So you go from merchant to acquirer to the card scheme to the issuer and to the cardholder's account. Perfect, or the other way around, but it's like that's a relay. Now you have so many more players, right? So you get gateways, right? So you have payment orchestrators, right? So you have token providers,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, it's not even volleyball anymore. It's a 4-dimensional game with multiple balls, because they all go because the flow is not linear and it doesn't go that way and comes back. It's multiple combinations. So for sure, it's a team sport. Unless you're playing as a team, you're not going to win in payments right now, I think.
Okay, no, that makes sense, absolutely, and a bit of a interesting analogy to think of a 4-dimensional game of volleyball, but I get where your point is. Obviously, payments used to be seen as fiercely competitive, but that's shifting a bit. What's the growing emphasis on collaboration? That ties in with what you said, I think, really, doesn't it? Yeah, I think we might scrub that question.
No, actually. So look, and it's not my answer. So
yeah.
A couple of days ago, maybe last week, there was an interview with the CEO of Plaid,
Yes.
Zach, and he talked in a very interesting way about competition and the industry competes with. And for him, the industry competes not with the existing banks and players or the infrastructure providers. The industry competes with a box of documents, a shoebox of documents that his parents took to the bank when they applied for the mortgage. And if you think about this kind of, whom are we competing with? Are we actually competing to broaden the playing field? Or are we trying to compete in ever decreasing space on features or on price that it actually, it's a zero-sum game, right?
Sure.
So, And so I found that so encouraging and kind of, exciting, that if you think about the industry and competition in that way, it kind of liberates liberates our thinking.
Yeah, it's more kind of what problem can we solve next?
Exactly. Whereas in sport, it's pretty defined, right? So you're competing against, the opponent and the rules of the game. In business, I think this is where I think it's great. We can create our own rules.
Yeah. No, I get it. Okay. And if you had one lesson for somebody that's leading a payments team today, what would it be?
I think for me, it's going back to the point that we've discussed. Lead as a coach, not as a captain. So there is the industry is too complex right now, too fragmented. The prize is so much bigger than we can imagine that there is no room for kind of hero leadership. But for that quiet, coach who can actually observe from the sidelines, support the team. The coaches don't score points. The teams that they coach do.
I like it. Nice. I got another question for you that somebody sent in.
Okay, perfect.
I asked for, and it's somebody that's worked with you before, Derek.
Okay.
So Derek's question was, I'll sum it up. It's a very interesting but quite a detailed question, which is essentially if you've got a sports team where a team member performing and isn't contributing as you'd like, you can make a very instant decision to correct that by substituting that person, bringing someone else on. When you're leading a team in payments, it's not quite as simple to get an instantaneous remedy because there's procedures and policies you need to follow. So what are the differences in how you approach that? How would you go about that differently? What lessons do you have to share?
Okay. I think it's no surprise, a very good question from Derek. So, I think there are a couple of aspects. So if we look at sports, so there are some sports that allow for substitution, right? So volleyball is one of them. The team is, 12, 14 players and only 7 are playing at one time. There are other sports like tennis or beach volleyball where there's no substitution allowed. So if someone is injured or someone is not performing, that is it, right? So the team basically grinds to a halt.
Yeah.
I think in business, we should be more thinking about how to build the bench strength in the organization, right? And may not be necessarily just in one team, right? So it's networking, it's establishing connections, it's knowing, the succession plans, right? So, and also building, some redundancies within the existing team. So the skills that are not unique to one individual, right? So trying to cross-pollinate the skill set.
Mm-hmm.
And so that will allow, so in the circumstances where we need to deal with substitutions in payments in the business world, that will allow to deal with those substitutions in a more kind of thoughtful way, in a more deliberate way, and be more prepared. Clearly, we cannot be prepared for all the circumstances. We don't know when we're going to get injured or whatever.
Sure.
But at the same time, if we know where the next talent is, if we involve maybe people who are outside of your team in some of the team projects, so they actually get introduced to how the team works, to how what the goals and objectives are, it makes it for a much easier transition. It's never easy. It is never easy. But I think leaders should be thinking about it and should be thinking about bench strength.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that you obviously always should be looking within the organization to how you can succession plan, how you can cross-pollinate, as you've essentially said. But there's a lot of people that are resistant to using people like me to actually go out and start forming bench options and knowing what's out there in the market, for fear that candidates' expectations can be brought up unnecessarily when there isn't actually a role. But there are other clients that I work with who understand that part of my job is to be able to say to people that this company is, got some really interesting things on the horizon. They're looking to build up a pool of people so that they can move quickly when the team expands to the next level or has new requirements. And then it's my job to actually manage that message in a way that candidates don't feel like they're being led up the garden path, and the company hits their objective as well, because it's hugely expensive to replace somebody, especially when you've got no plan. Whereas if someone like me is engaged and, it's an investment that pays off by being able to move quickly at the right time.
Yeah. So I think it's the cost of replacing, but it's also the lost revenue.
Yeah.
Lost time, lost opportunity cost, absolutely. But think about it. I think the role that you play, Paul, is almost you're working with different companies,
Yep,
to find the best talent to take it to the national team.
Yeah.
See, and you cannot build a national team from one club only. So you do need talent from outside of the company. And I think that's the one of the roles. I mean, you and your colleagues play different roles, but that's one of the roles that I think is hugely important.
Yeah, Is it because you can't be expected to know everybody when you've got the day job of fulfilling the ambitions of a company? But my job is knowing everybody that's out there and knowing who would be a good fit for the cultures that I should take the time to educate myself on and know. So yeah, we've ended up giving quite a long answer there to Derek's question. But
as I said, he always asks good questions.
yeah, excellent stuff. Well, thank you very much. I think that's been very illuminating and very interesting as well. It's not every day you meet somebody that could have gone down a very different path and still manages to find a way of combining that in their day-to-day. So thank you. I found that very interesting.
Thank you, Paul. And it was a great opportunity for me to speak to you and also to think myself about some of this aspect, because not every day do we have this luxury of thinking about reflection and putting things together. So I it was absolutely a delight. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed today's show. What questions should I have asked? Or what guests would you like me to interview in the future? Please let me know in the comments below. Also, if you'd like any help finding any senior sales executives, then send me a message here or look me up on LinkedIn. Thanks very much for watching.